Good evening, my friends. I am interrupting my little series on relating to others with trust and calm to talk about training with food because I've had a lot of people ask me about this a lot, and I sat down the other night and was like, I'm going to write about this, and so I did. So I'm recording it now. So this is my approach again for those who are using neuroplasticity to expand their lives and recover. This is my approach. This is what has worked for me. It's very different than what I've seen suggested elsewhere. Um, so let's dive in. This is the biggest thing that I there are no words to describe how correlated the power of our digestive system and our brain's ability to handle new things, but especially new foods. It's completely related to how calm you are. Like, that's calm is everything. And one of the biggest things that I did in my journey, in my recovery, and that I see other people doing the opposite and it doesn't work, is this. I waited until my brain was calm to introduce foods. And for me, that was just kind of an intuitive thing. Like, I remember my coach telling me that kind of early on. Like, wait till your brain's calm. And I trained in a few things at the beginning because I had very few foods when I started, and I needed to train in a couple things so I could, you know, not starve while I nursed my twins and rewired my brain. But I didn't actually really incorporate a lot of foods into my diet again for like another 2 years after that first bit. And I mean, I had a very unique journey. It's not what I recommend for everyone, but what I do recommend is to train on calm first. If your limbic system is triggered 24/7 still, and you're having 24/7 its and pops of any variety, I would recommend, if you're going to train on food, pick the ones that are non-negotiable for you, just a couple, and the rest of these tips will apply in that scenario. But if at all possible, like, get your minimum in and then train on calm. Just use what's coming up in your day-to-day life as incremental training, and get yourself to a place where you're having extended periods of calm for a while before you want to introduce another food, before you try it again, because it will go so much easier. It will work. And that's one thing I see. At times, and I've seen other people really kind of pushing to get a food in, and it's not working, and it's like, you just need to wait until you've really calmed everything else down, because a lot of times, a lot of those, the 24/7 activity hasn't calmed down yet, and it's like, when the limbic system is that activated and there's that much stress chemistry running through the body, rest and digest is not activated yet. You're still having your digestive system hasn't really turned back on yet, and so introducing new foods is just going to kind of create a bit of a limbic storm. It's not really going to work. So that's firsthand my experience. And one of the reasons for this, I think, biologically is, it's different than training around other substances or activities where it's like, once you stop, the exposure is over. With food, you put it in your body, and it takes, I mean, I've heard it takes 72 hours. I don't know, exactly the amount of time, but it's there. It's in your body until it exits your body, and it's moving through it's always moving to a new part of your body that's having to handle it in a new way. This food you haven't eaten in a long time. And that's very different. So your brain needs to be calm the whole time that food is inside of you, because the exposure doesn't end once you stop eating. It's just begun. So that's part of why, if you've trained on calm and those wires of calm are really strong already, you're likely to succeed with ease in adding new foods, because those wires are already pretty strong. So you have new wires to put yourself into, to redirect to. Once that the trigger, the thing that used to be triggering, has entered your body, you have somewhere else to go neurologically. If you haven't built those wires of calm, your brain doesn't have anywhere to go but more panic and more anxiety and more looping. So that's one of the reasons why one of my biggest tips is just wait until, wait. It's a proactive wait. Like, train yourself on calm for a bit first, and wait till you have those extended periods of calm, and then try. That's one of my biggest, my first piece of advice with this. The next one is very similar. You cannot go too slow. It's impossible. It's impossible. So it's so funny, because a lot of times the perspective I see given to people is that you really need to be, you need to train every day, at least 2 triggers a day, train, really focus on, don't avoid from fear, so on and so forth. And it's like, I don't know if y'all have met Americans or people in general who've had LSI. I mean, a lot of people I work with aren't American, but when we've had a limbic system impairment, a big piece of that journey for a lot of us is pushing ourselves way too hard, way too fast, and not having that ability to use restraint and logic when it comes to including new things in life and training towards something. What I did and what I see most people do is just dive in, like jump in the deep end, head first and feet first at the same time, and it doesn't it doesn't go over well with the limbic system because it needs time to adapt. It really does. And that's the pattern I see in most people. And in myself, I had that in different areas, not food so much as, but other areas where it's like this need to push to get it done, and the desire to do it all. And it's like, once you start, you can't stop kind of thing. That's the pattern I see. So you have all the time in the world to do this. You're committed. You're all in. You've got literally all the time in the world. There is no rush, and it's going to be much gentler on you. And this is a process of self-love. So any kind of incremental training you're doing, if you're training yourself to be able to handle anything well in life, that's an act of self-love. You are expanding your life. That's the point. So take it slow. Take it easy on yourself. Allow yourself time to adapt. And part of this is, whether or not, and I'm not a stickler on measuring how much of anything you're eating, but if you decide beforehand whether or not you're going to measure, because again, as I've said in other videos, it's so important that we make our decisions before we start doing something, because part of what we're doing is we're helping the brain get behind us, or helping your limbic system get in line behind the choice you made, which means that you need to have made a choice that you are all in and committed to at least try for a few weeks. And if it doesn't work, you can try something else. So decide beforehand, do I want to measure how much of this I'm eating or not? And I personally never measured things. But I didn't go willy-nilly either, and that's so this is where it really comes in. Whether or not you're measuring, my recommendation would be to not increase the amount of the thing you're training on by more than 20% a week. I would go with 20% a week or less of however much you're eating. And I mean, that could be like a handful of almonds or a bowl of yogurt, or I don't know, a spoonful of yogurt. Okay, well then I'll do a bigger spoonful next week, or whatever it is. But just keep it to that. Keep it even. Keep it logical. It's just going to allow your brain time to adapt. And part of this particular tip is you don't have to feel triggered by doing incremental training. You're expanding your horizons. You're teaching your brain how to handle this calmly. You do not have to feel triggered. You're retraining your brain whether or not you do feel triggered. It's happening. That rewiring is happening because you're eating it. You're introducing a new substance into your body, and your brain's learning how to handle that calmly as you do it, and then do around, and then continue elevating your mood for the next several days, as you always do, because that's part of this process, is continuing self-love. Keep yourself in a positive emotional state. But yes, it does not, you don't have to feel triggered in any way. Oh yes, another thing that I personally did and that I do recommend, because again, this is about teaching the brain that these things are safe. They're safe. They can't hurt me. So you don't want to have the idea that, you don't want to reinforce the idea that it's the food that's the problem by being like, let me eat this food and then do around. And that was necessary. Like, I did that with one food because that food I knew my brain was just terrified of, and I really needed to be consciously like, this isn't scary, brain. Look, not scary. It's okay. But the rest of them, I would just eat a few bites of something before I went off and did my evening rounds, or before I ate breakfast. Or I would eat it at breakfast, rather, and then go to my morning rounds. But just slip it in when it's a time when you normally would be practicing after you eat. And that way, you're getting the benefit, because you do need to do a round after in order to redirect the neuronal pathway and create a new one. That's important and necessary, and that needs to be done immediately after. But I like doing it in a way where I could just kind of nonchalantly slip it in there and be like, and act like nothing had happened, because nothing's happened. It's okay. It's safe. You already know that, and you're acting like it. So that's one tip that I've done, and I think it helped, because you don't want your brain to get attached to the idea that, oh, I have to fix it because there's something wrong, or I have to change. That will happen by itself. The change in association is something that happens in your subconscious mind, and it's dependent on your actions and your emotional state. You don't have to be aware of what you're doing, and it's easier if you're not. So that's another thing to make it easier on yourself. Um, yeah. Okay. Yeah, and this is important. So while you don't have to feel triggered, you may, and the chances are you probably will at some point, at least a little bit. So just use that. Like, all it is necessary to do is keep focusing on a positive mood elevator, keep focusing on the task at hand, and focusing on nurturing yourself with positive emotions. And it'll probably feel like a pull. Your brain will want to pull to an old pathway, and you're just going to keep yourself steady, focused on what you're doing as you always do, and that's when the rewiring is happening, is in those moments. So there's nothing more to do than that. It's that simple. Okay, so on a similar note, and this is a question I got recently that was really good, because I was like, I mean, I've never really thought about it for myself, but it's a really helpful question. How do you know when a food is in? It's like, yeah, that's a really good question. So, speaking to what I just said, where a lot of times, because when you're training on something, a lot of times there will be a pull. There will be the brain will want to go back to those old wires, and it will take an additional concerted effort to keep yourself in a positive emotional state, to keep the brain from looping, keep yourself going in a straight line. It'll take more effort. So once you've trained to the point where you're eating full servings of that food on a pretty regular basis, and you're still doing a round afterwards and so forth, but you'll reach a point where, because again, if you're already doing it, if you're slipping it in at a meal where you're already doing rounds, it'll be pretty natural. You won't really be putting a lot of extra effort into it. So once the point comes where you're doing it and you notice, like, oh, I it's not taking any additional effort. Like, I'm not feeling triggered. I feel completely normal. Like, and normal being, I feel normal. Not necessarily that you don't have its, but that you feel calm and content and happy and able to focus. That, not that you don't have its, because the point of this process, the point of recovery is when you are happy and calm, and maybe your body has its and you couldn't care less because you're not paying any attention to it, and you've detached from it, so it's not getting to you. It's not bothering you. That's the first step. It's disappearing is the second step, and a lot of times you don't even notice, or if you do, it's just like, oh wow, I feel amazing, this is great. So that's the point you want to get to, is when you get to a point where you're able to stay elevated and keep yourself elevated without any additional effort, after doing your full, eating the full serving of the food and doing a round, and you continue on, and you feel completely normal emotionally and psychologically. You feel normal, and if you have its, you aren't even really, you're not paying attention. It doesn't take effort to redirect away from them. That means the food is in. Now, this doesn't mean you should go do free for all, because the incremental increase is still important to do even once the food is in. So once the food is in, then what you could do is just, however much of it you've been eating, say you've been eating 3 servings of yogurt a week, just for kicks and giggles, and, it's done, it's in, you're good, it's totally fine, you feel fine with it. Then, maybe increase to 4 the next week, if you want to start eating it more than that and so forth, and just stop, slip it in at times when you're not doing a round afterwards, and see if it goes okay. If it doesn't go okay, put it back in before a round. But continue to just increase incrementally if you're going to keep increasing the amount you're eating, so that you don't have an unnecessary exit of the training zone, because that's never fun. It's not a loving thing to do to yourself, to just walk over the edge of that cliff. Not fun. So that's also connected to the next thing, which is how do you know if the food isn't in your training zone? And that is if you introduce the smallest amount that you think is reasonable. I did this, and for me it was with peanuts, and I started with 5 peanuts, and it wasn't in my training zone. I was like, okay, that's special. But how you know is if, no matter how hard you focus, and say, and again, regardless of where you're at in your recovery, no matter how hard you focus, you cannot keep yourself out of a loop. It's not in your training zone. And you'll know if you're giving it all you've got. You'll know if you're giving it everything you've got, and you just cannot keep yourself out of that rut. Then, some rut, some kind of rut. Doesn't have to be any particular rut. But if your brain gets stuck in a rut and you cannot keep it out or get it out, you're not in your training zone anymore. So that's how you know if it's not. And again, so if you've introduced a certain amount and it seems to be okay, if you get to a point where you've put so much into your diet where it's like, wow, I'm really starting to feel like I can't keep myself calm, I can't keep myself out of pops, I can't keep myself out of limby land, as I used to call it, then it's not in your training zone. It's time to pull back and, look at other factors and the whole mess of things, which that's not something I can help you with on a YouTube video, but there are other factors to take into place if that's happening. But yeah, so yeah, those are my main tips for how I retrained with food. So just lots of patience, lots of self-love, and lots of dose chemistry. That's the bottom line. Be consistent, be really consistent, be really patient, and things will. This is one thing I did want to say too, because when it comes to incremental training, and one of the reasons why patience is so important is you don't want to challenge yourself to a point where you feel like you can't keep yourself out of a rut, and then you start to feel despairing and disappointed and disenchanted and like things aren't working, because that's really counterproductive to your recovery. So that's part of the reason it's important to stay in your training zone. And then that's one thing I tell people is like, if you get to a point where you feel like there's no hope and you're despairing because things are so intense, a lot of times that's a sign that you're not in your training zone. So just a tip on that. I mean, that goes for any area, but since we're talking about that here, I thought I'd mention that. So yeah, that's that. So for everyone who's been waiting for this video, here you go. And the next one will go back to talking about relationships. So have fun expanding your lives and nourishing yourself with love and delicious food and peaceful ease. And I will talk to you soon. Have a great night, my friends.